It's really changing the perception of how we see things. And if we can change the perception of it, we reduce the stress reaction, the physical part of that, like right away.
Experiencing a stress response isn't harmful per se. What makes it harmful is when our stress response is triggered and then remains chronically elevated over time.
The difference between excitement and anxiety is more or less just the framing. It's just the story you're telling yourself.
Want to be happy? Build a life, not just a business. Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and this channel was created to help you overcome the #1 challenge that is holding you back, a lack of belief in yourself. You watch these videos because you know there's something more inside you too. You've got Michael Jordan level genius at something. So today, let's live your best believe life and learn about the stress response system and how you can manage your stress levels. Enjoy. Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1. Deactivate the stress with John Assaraf.
Inner size number 1 is called Take 6, Calm the Circuits.
There it is.
So there are 2 major circuits in the human brain, the parasympathetic nervous system or circuit and the sympathetic nervous system. So when we have a disempowering experience, a fear, a stress, anxiety, uncertainty, self-doubt, the sympathetic nervous system is kicked in, and basically the neurochemicals of cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline kick in, and we just don't like that feeling in a lot of cases. It also shuts down motivational centers in our brain. It shuts down our thinking and imagination center in our brain, and so we're in a heightened state of disempowerment and procrastination and fear.
And the fight or flight thing you were talking about earlier.
And the fight or flight kicks in. So one of the first things to do is whenever you feel, anxious, angry, stressed, uncertain, you take 6 deep breaths in through your nose and then out through your mouth, but blow out like you're blowing out through a straw. So in through your nose, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then pucker your lips a little. And focus on the airflow coming out of your mouth for 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 6 seconds. When you do that just 6 times, takes less than 1 minute to a max of 90 seconds, you actually deactivate the sympathetic circuitry, which causes us to have elevated heartbeat, elevated blood pressure, and it activates the parasympathetic. So in the stress,
so you're Frankenstein to your Einstein.
You got it. So when Frankenstein activates, right, you're in a stress mode. And to deactivate the stress mode, you do Take 6, Calm the Circuits, and that puts you in the calm and respond mode. So it's stress and react, calm and respond.
Rule number 2, change your perception with Robert Zembrowski.
You have a practice, you're going through chemo. These are not stress-free things. So how did you, and I like the notion of pulling weeds, how did you tend that garden?
I didn't want to get ill again. And I didn't want to have something influence my biology again to maybe set the stage for recurrence, remission. I hate those words as well. But it just sets the negative mindset up for people. And I'm a driver, my mental mindset. As I said, when I woke up, I'm rebuilding. When I got clear and the tubes are out and I'm back at the gym, I'm gonna take this to a new level. So it's just, I wanted to push myself to a different level. Each phase, I wanted to do something different. And so, as I said, the stress is a big thing, and there's no stress. People are like, aren't you worried about this, that, and money and fun? I'm like, nope. The house can burn down, who cares? Stress is a perception. Unless it's a physical thing, you break your ankle, sunburn, Those are physical stressors. But there's 2 things that people need to realize, and that I realize. 1, stress is a perception. The stress reaction, Tom, is something totally different. Like, we need to separate the 2. If you can change your perception of the thing that's stressing you out, that's finances, you get a new car, we take a ride, somebody hits it, you're like, oh my God, my new car. I'm like, dude, it's metal. Let's just go get it fixed. You'll have a new one next week, So it's really changing the perception of how we see things. And if we can change the perception of it, we reduce the stress reaction, the physical part of that, like right away.
Do you meditate?
I do. Well, I don't know if I call it meditation, but I sit quietly and I tap into the universe. And maybe
Whoa.
that's,
What do you mean by that?
I'm downloading at the gym. I connect with universal
God, can you
laws and
explain
energy.
it?
Yeah, so for me, when I put my feet on the ground, I thank the universe, God, whatever it may be, I thank that energy source for me being alive. I thank it for my intelligence. I thank it for my want to help other people. And so when I plant my feet on the ground, it's the first thing that I do because it sets the stage for my mindset every day. Every day. In the hotel room, it doesn't matter, every day. Because then it just helps me set my mindset. Like, you want to have some way to set your mindset so you don't wake up and just go, oh my God, I got all these things happening. And then you're out of your mind, your perceptions are off. You start to release stress hormones, you're eating like crap, you're destroying your immune system, and here you go, you start to brew disease. So for me, it's perception. And if I can change my perception daily, Tom, I've been through life-threatening disease. I had the Grim Reaper tapping me with a sickle. So stressors for me just become whatever. Like whatever. Why would I freak out about something, one, that perhaps I can't control? And if I can change my perception, what if I can change the stressful situation to something positive?
Rule number 3, experience stress with Ethan Kross.
Can chatter make us ill?
Well, I think the answer to that question is yes. And it's interesting because I think many people can easily relate to having the experience of stress. But throughout time, stress has been this kind of abstract thing that happens in your head. And things that happen in your head have lacked the same kind of concreteness. We can't feel it the same way that we can we can feel a wound swell in our body, or see like our arteries get filled with plaque and other things that lead to heart attacks and things like of that sort. So I think actually the brain imaging that has evolved over the past 20 years has helped a lot with that in terms of helping people see how stress can manifest in the brain and how that can in turn have downstream implications for health. But the way this works, the snapshot that exists, so how does stress actually make us physically ill? One of the leading theories is the idea that as human beings, we are designed to experience stress, right? Experiencing stress is a really useful adaptive response to a threat in our environment. It's a good system to have. I wouldn't want my worst enemy to not be able to experience stress because they wouldn't survive well in the world. Experiencing a stress response isn't harmful per se. What makes it harmful is when our stress response is triggered and then remains chronically elevated over time. That exerts a wear and tear on the body that we are not designed for. And what helps keep our stress responses active over time? It's me getting an email last night that I wasn't so happy about and replaying that email in my head, hearing the words spoken over and over and over again, and replaying that email today and tomorrow, thinking how I'm going to respond. This may or may not be a hypothetical event, by the way. But it is our minds are capable of maintaining our stress responses. And when you get people who are ruminating or worrying for long stretches of time, that's what the mind is doing. It's keeping us in that stress state. And that has been shown to predict a host of physical maladies that range from cardiovascular disease to problems of inflammation to various forms of cancer. And so the link to our physical health is there. It's strong. And I think it's one of the 3 big reasons to really be concerned about chatter.
Rule number 4, practice elevated emotions with Dr. Joe Dispenza.
So imagine then you have an inner army of plasma cells, of white blood cells that release immunoglobulins, antibodies that are strong defenses against internal invaders on a microscopic level, that memorize those invaders, pass the information to the legion of white blood cells so that your immune system can tolerate and defend you in any foreign agent in your inner world. Now, our research has shown, along with several other people, that when people can trade those survival emotions, those stress hormones like fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and anger and frustration and judgment and competition for more elevated emotions, more heart-centered emotions, it is those heart-centered emotions that we are able to open our heart and feel kindness and compassion and to have a love for life and to feel gratitude and appreciation and really work with our body to elevate our emotional state, it makes sense then that if we do this properly, we are going to convert from the gas pedal of the sympathetic nervous system to teach our body to break that pattern of constantly being in survival. And when we start to feel elevated emotions, we feel less separate from everyone and everything, and we start to feel more connected to everyone and everything. And when we do this properly and we start to open our hearts, our research shows that we begin to strengthen our immune system. In fact, our research shows that for 10 minutes a day, 3 times a day, if you practiced feeling those elevated emotions, you would begin to release an immunoglobulin called immunoglobulin A, which is your body's primary defense against bacteria and viruses. It is the body's natural flu shot that creates an immunity to the environment, both macroscopically and microscopically. So then 10 minutes a day, 3 times a day, changing your mood and breaking the stress response and teaching your body that it feels safe enough to be in the present moment that it can create, that it's moving out of survival. Doing this properly, the body's so objective that it does not know the difference between the experience and the environment that's creating the emotion of love and gratitude and you doing it by volition. Your body begins to move more into the present moment, and here comes the parasympathetic nervous system. And now its job is to restore, to rebalance, to repair, to increase metabolic functions, to release 1,300 different chemicals that can begin to restore and repair your body. The body now is moving out of emergency, and there are resources to heal. And so feeling those heart-centered emotions and changing from fear, say, to love is going to begin to cause those white blood cells, those plasma cells, to release the proper proteins epigenetically that are going to cause your body to have a strength against any virus, bacteria, fungus, or mold, or even cancer cell. And we've proven that our students, by reversing cancer, have done this very exact thing. Our work is about something else. It's about changing our inner state by thought alone. And so when we do this properly and we trade those survival emotions for elevated emotions, and we're able to practice that every day, it makes sense to us then that people are going to start to heal, and they are going to produce a legion of strong white blood cells that can memorize and attack any foreign agents. And there's been other research that shows that as fear levels go up, it suppresses our immune system dramatically. And when we elevate our emotions, we see then that we reverse that process.
Also, if you want to have more self-confidence and self-belief, the science says it can take up to 254 days of consecutive action for the habit to stick. That's what I want for you. So I've designed a custom free program where I'm going to send you an unlisted video for the next 254 days to shift your confidence and belief forward. The link to join is in the description below.
You were up and dressed and ready to go before your parents were up. You know why? Because you knew something unexpected was going to happen. That's how we should live our lives. Waking up with the understanding to expect the unexpected.
If you didn't give a shit what anybody else thought, what's the thing you would love to be doing with your life?
People want to know how to stop the laziness, and they want to know how to stop the procrastination.
Rule number 5, interrupt the negative patterns with Mel Robbins.
You have this behavior pattern where you snap. You have this behavior pattern where you yell and you get upset and you make people wrong and you don't mean to. If you are somebody who's ever said to yourself, I wish I could stop yelling, or I wish I could just snap, I could stop snapping. This video is absolutely unbelievable, okay? And the reason why is I explained this research that was so mind-blowing for me. It's called Ghosts in the Nursery. A lot of the patterns that you have that you don't have control over are patterns from your childhood, and they are there because when you were a kid, you experienced people in your life that were tense. Did you ever have a parent that was a yeller? Did you ever have a teacher that was a yeller or a coach that was a yeller? And secretly in your little kid body, whenever your mom or dad would yell, or your coach would yell, or your teacher would yell, or your grandmother or grandfather would yell, you would feel tense, right? You would feel nervous. You would feel on edge. Of course, that's how we all feel, right? Well, here's the reason why you might have an issue, like I used to have an issue, where I would yell at my kids and then I'd feel terrible about it. I'd snap at my husband and then I'd feel terrible about it. Psychologists, and then I would say to myself, I'm not doing that again, I'm not doing that again, but I wouldn't have the ability to end it. Psychologists call this ghosts in the nursery. It means that any situation where you start to feel tense or you start to feel stressed out, guess what happens? Your body remembers what it was like when you were little to feel tense and stressed out, and what were the adults doing around you when you felt that way? They were snapping, they were yelling, and now here you are repeating the pattern, and you don't know why, and you feel guilty. And I'm explaining this to you because it wasn't until I thought, holy cow, like I know I don't want to snap at my husband. I know I don't want to take my anger from work out on my family. Why can't I stop this? That's the reason why. It's because it's a pattern that you remember from being a kid, that the adults around you were snapping or yelling or being mean anytime, and when they were, you felt tense and stressed out. So now that you're an adult, when you're tense and stressed out, you repeat the behavior that you witnessed. Crazy, right? So how do you stop it? Well, the first step to stopping anything is to actually understand what you're dealing with. Now that you know you're dealing with a pattern, now all you need to do is basically say, okay, I'm going to put a practice in place that's going to interrupt this pattern. What's the practice? Well, a really good one is before you walk in the house at the end of the day, if you're stressed out, take 5. Take 5 deep breaths. Like reset your mood, reset your energy before you walk in the house, and you'll be surprised by how much nicer you are to the people around you. Another thing that you can do, and this one's not so fun, is you can train your partner, your kids, your roommates, your family, that if you're trying to get a hold of how you bring stress home, you can train them to say to you, hey, don't take your work stress out on me. When somebody that you care about says that to you, it's a humbling experience. And the person that says it the most in my life is my son, Oakley. The youngsters seem to love to cross-check the adults. So be careful with taking that advice.
Rule number 6, embrace stress with Andrew Huberman.
There is something called adrenal insufficiency syndrome, which is a real medical phenomenon where the adrenals are incapable of making these cortisol and adrenal hormones. But the truth is that you have enough adrenaline and cortisol in your body to last 2 lifetimes and 25 famines. I mean, we were built with a lot of robustness, right? This explains, the David Goggins of the world. We all do have that greater capacity that people talk about. The stress is very misunderstood because people think of stress as this ancient carryover that's very unfortunate. It kind of gets lumped with depression, like, oh, this is just a flaw in our design or something. But actually, stress is wonderful. It actually activates our immune system. So anytime you liberate adrenaline into your bloodstream, you also protect yourself against infection of bacteria and viruses. Because if you think about it, if we had to gather food and we didn't have it, and we had to then pack up and migrate long distances, you can't afford to get sick. And this is why people who work, and then rest, they usually get sick when they finally stop and rest.
Really?
Yeah, it's like the post-finals phenomenon in university, or after the season for a game, or the caretakers thing where you're taking care of somebody who's ill and you're just work, or taking care of young children, and then you finally stop to rest, you go on vacation, and you get slammed with an illness.
Why is that? Because you're being in your comfort zone now? Or
because stress turned off. And adrenaline, so that the stress response recruits the immune organs of the body to release killer T cells. In fact, Wim Hof breathing, I know you're familiar with Wim, of doing 20 or 30 deep inhales and exhales, and also combined with some breath hold type work, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, is known to stimulate adrenaline release. And one of the better papers that's out there, scientific peer-reviewed papers, is a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences where they brought in 2 groups. One group did Wim Hof breathing. The other group did just mindful meditation. Both groups were injected with E. coli. Right?
It's crazy.
Right?
It's crazy.
Right? It's crazy. The meditators got fever, diarrhea, and vomiting, and the people who did Wim Hof either didn't get it or got it to a much lesser
They felt
extent.
sluggish, but
That's
not.
right. They didn't. Right.
Isn't that
This is not an
crazy?
experiment to do at home.
Isn't this crazy?
But it makes perfect sense because that breathing simulates a stress response. It stimulates cortisol and adrenaline, which signals
Which
to the
protects the body.
right, which signals to the thymus, the spleen, and the other, the nodes of the immune system to liberate killer cells. And so when that bacteria comes in, the system is ready for it.
Your body is defending against viruses
That's
and
right.
disease,
That's right.
essentially.
Going back to-
When you create a routine of healthy stress.
That's right. And we could talk about, we definitely want to, you don't want stress on all the time. Sleep is really important, et cetera. But that stress response combats infection because it recruits immune cells.
Rule number 7, detach and take control with Jocko Willink.
There's been thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of warriors that have been in very stressful situations and faced evil and faced death much worse than the situation I'm in or you're in that we might consider stressful. And I even did this when I was overseas, when I was on deployment, when I was a combat leader. I was feeling stress. And you know what? We took casualties and it was awful and it was heartbreaking. But there were other soldiers and warriors throughout time that have been in much worse situations. Gettysburg or Vicksburg or the Battle of the Bulge. And all those horrible situations, they prove really that humans can withstand almost unimaginable stress. Which meant to me that I could too. And you can. And the first step for me is doing that, taking that look to gain some perspective. And then in order to gain perspective, you got to do something that we already talked about. You've got to detach. You've got to detach from the problems or the stress that you're experiencing so that you can get that perspective of them. Now, there's a couple different types of stress. Now, if it's something that you can control that's causing you stress, well, why aren't you getting control of it? Now, there's also stress that's caused by things that you cannot control. And if you remember talking earlier about artillery and how horrible that was, and what made it so horrible was that there's no control over it. So if you can't control something and you can't get control of it, you have to at least embrace what you can. And I'm not saying you're going to embrace artillery shelling, but I'll tell you what, when it comes to things like artillery, or for us in Ramadi was IEDs, and we could do everything we could do to mitigate that risk, but eventually there's only so much you can do, and you cannot completely eliminate it. But you can't control it, so why are you going to worry about it? Why are you going to stress about it? If there's something that's completely beyond your control, you've got to detach from it and not let yourself get stressed about it. And on top of that, if it's something that you can't control, how can you look at it in a different light? How can you see it in a way that you could actually take advantage of it? How can you take that stress and make it into some kind of ally? You know, the chaos of combat is something that I couldn't control, but I had to embrace it so I could try and figure out how to take advantage of it. So when it comes to stress, don't fight it. Turn it on itself and use it Use it. Use it to make yourself sharper and more alert. And use it to make yourself think more and learn more and get better. And use that stress as a catalyst to make yourself better.
Rule number 8, watch your diet with Drew Ramsey.
If you think about your brain as the lens through which you're filtering all this data, right? Is the lion on the screen a lion on the screen, or is it actually in the room with you about to eat you? Your brain is very good at sorting that out. And if we think about the quality of that lens really being influenced by a few things or a few processes, one you mentioned like the microbiome, that's really talking about inflammation, right? How does this word of inflammation affect the brain? If we think about it in terms of my favorite concept these days, neuroplasticity, right? Brain growth and brain change over time. Definitely food influences that. There are a bunch of specific molecular mechanisms where we can see that now. And so that's how I think about the way that we try and sort that out, is thinking, have there been changes in your diet? Sometimes I see people are like, oh my gosh, my anxiety is so much worse. It's because I freaked out. I'm just eating comfort foods. I've eaten pasta for 3 days. I haven't had a vegetable. Nutrient density, when we think about brain health, comes down to B vitamins, magnesium, iron. We did a research study, a really small study that I did with Dr. Laura LaChance, who's also a psychiatrist, where we just said, if we look at all the literature, what are the 12 nutrients that are most important for brain health, and specifically depression? That's the most debilitating disease. Like, does something stand out? And there are 12 nutrients that had really, as we went through like levels of evidence, significant data of both epidemiological studies, but also clinical trials. We took those 12 nutrients, and I think this is the most important thing people miss. We turned them into food. We asked, what foods have the most of these nutrients? And you mentioned bivalves. So usually with these scales, like the ANDI, the Aggregate Nutrient Density Index, it's all plants, because plants always have fewer calories. And I didn't like that because 98% of people eat meat or seafood, and I was curious. So we listed all the plants, and they're what you'd expect, lots of leafy greens and rainbows. But in the animals, 3 of the top 5 are bivalves: mussels, clams, and oysters.
And when we're talking about that scale, these are things that contain the 12 key nutrients.
They contain the most. They're the foods with the most of these 12 nutrients. So I know that number 1 on the plants is watercress, which is really, kind of leads for leafy greens, but so are all lettuces, kale, collards. Kale's like number 12 or 15, red peppers, pomelo. And so that's the way I get to these foods, is through nutrient density. That then leads us to food categories. And so the bivalves in seafood are a food category because they're the most concentrated and only source of long-chain omega-3 fats. The omega-3 fats, we make them in our liver a little bit when we eat plant omega-3 fats, but there's reasonable data, especially when you think like the pregnancy data, like women who eat more fish, their babies tend to have like higher verbal IQs and less behavioral. That's
actually been tested?
9 verbal IQ points if you feed pregnant women.
Whoa.
If you give them salmon. There have been some really, I'd love to do a hardcore data deep dive with you because I'm really curious what you think about the studies, but there's a variety of data that if you feed kids, pregnant moms, and individuals more seafood, you see lower rates of depression and bipolar disorder. Actually, one of the first studies in nutritional psychiatry looked around the world at intakes of seafood and found that cultures that eat more seafood have lower rates of bipolar illness.
Rule number 9, identify the triggers with Dr. Rangan Chatterjee.
I think in my first book, How to Make Disease Disappear, I spoke about what I consider to be the 4 sort of pillars of health, as it were, the 4 things that I think have the most impact on our health, but also we've got a fair degree of control over: food, movement, which we've been talking about for years, but equally important, sleep and relaxation.
Yeah.
And what was quite clear to me is that people were feeding back to me that the pillar they were struggling with the most, or many of them were, was the whole relax pillar, this whole piece about stress. Mm-hmm. People were sort of thinking about their food and their movement, but they really struggled with stress. And I thought, you know what? Food gets a lot of airtime, movement gets a lot of airtime. I don't think stress is getting the airtime that it deserves. And that's why I thought, well, I'm going to write a book on stress to really elevate it in terms of our consciousness, in terms of what we're thinking about. And you mentioned in the introduction, the World Health Organization, right now, if you go on their website, will say that stress is the health epidemic of the 21st century. Now, that's an alarming statement.
The health epidemic, wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. And then
I might fight a little bit with that. I think
our food problem is a big one.
Well,
right up there. It's right up there.
Well, I think stress and food is linked actually, because
actually our diet, you probably know this, but our diet, if it's bad, causes physiologic stress. So when you eat sugar and crap, it actually raises your cortisol and stress hormones.
100%.
Even if you're not mentally stressed, it makes you physically stressed.
Well, a lot of these things actually, as you know, Mark, work both ways. So yeah, the poor dietary choices can send stress signals up to your brain. Good food choices can send calm signals up to your brain. Or this is all to do with the gut-brain axis, which you've written about before, I've written about in this book. But also, I would say it works both ways. So if you are chronically stressed, it's quite hard to make those good, healthy food choices. And let's take January in the UK and the US. Every January, people are trying to get healthy, right? I'm going to reduce my sugar intake this year. I'm going to cut out alcohol this year. But here's the problem I've seen is that people can use willpower for a week, for 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. But if the sugar or the alcohol was being used to help them soothe the stresses in their life, they're never going to maintain it long term. So I agree food is a big problem. But I found with some patients, addressing their stress levels means they feel less of a need to binge on sugar because they're not feeling as stressed.
If you're happy, you're not going to eat that bag of Chips Ahoy cookies.
Yeah, because a lot of our food choices are dictated by our emotions. And, if we're feeling down, if we're feeling stressed, if we feel we've got too much on, actually that sugary chocolate bar or that bag of chips actually helps us feel good in that moment. So short-term benefit, but long-term harm. I tell a story in my book about this chap who I saw. He was a busy business guy in his early 50s. And what was really interesting about him is that we started to measure something called heart rate variability on him. So heart rate variability.
What is that?
It's, basically it's a measure of what is the beat to beat variation between our heartbeats. Now, people will think it should be like a metronome, tick tock, tick tock.
70, 70, 70, 70.
Yeah, but that's actually incorrect. What we're looking for is a high degree of variability.
Complexity.
Complexity. And it shows that we're constantly adapting and able to adapt to this changing environment around us. And what was interesting with him...
the worst heart rhythm is got no variability. It's a flat line.
Yeah. So a low heart rate variability is actually indicative that we've got high stress levels in our body.
Yes.
And this chap actually on a Wednesday evening, he would find that he was drinking a lot of alcohol. He wasn't sleeping well. He was having a lot of caffeine on Thursday, more alcohol on the Thursday. He came in, he was really, really stressed. It was impacting his relationships, impacting his sleep, etc., etc. The very common story. But as we start to look at his life and actually use HRV, heart rate variability readings, we could see that everything changed for him on a Wednesday. So what happened on a Wednesday lunchtime, he had a team meeting, right? He found that incredibly stressful. He had to present to his team. It was quite a high pressure meeting, and that stress would last throughout the day. So what would happen is on a Wednesday late afternoon when he would leave work, he had to compensate with that stress. How would he do that?
Alcohol.
So he'd open a bottle of wine, he'd have a glass. One glass would turn into two would turn into three, and by the end of the evening, he'd had the whole bottle of wine. So what happens then? He doesn't sleep well on the Wednesday nights. So Thursday morning, he's feeling groggy. He needs lots of coffee, lots of sugar to get him through. Coffee in the afternoon as well, which again impacts his ability to sleep on Thursday nights. He's not feeling good. And that cycle continues where he's having a bottle of wine on Thursday, 2 bottles of wine on the Friday, and et cetera, et cetera. But what did we do? We identified his trigger point was a Wednesday lunchtime. So I could show him that on the data. He could see it very clearly. So we discussed about certain things he might be able to do on a Wednesday evening instead of alcohol. Now, there was a
massage, do a yoga class.
Well, there was a yoga class very near his office. So before he went home, he went to the yoga class. So what happens then? He goes to that yoga class. That helps him de-stress. When he gets home, he no longer feels the need to drink a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
So he might have a glass, but it's one glass and it stops there. He sleeps well. Thursday, he feels fresh. He doesn't get as stressed at work. He doesn't have as much coffee. Yeah. And before you know it, all we had to do was give him a yoga class on a Wednesday afternoon. And suddenly that changed his whole week. And people who are listening to this, I'd really ask them to reflect on their own life and think, actually, is there a trigger point in my week where things start to go downhill?
Yeah.
Because if you can identify that and change your behavior, it is incredible what you can achieve.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is frame your story with Sam Harris.
Mindfulness is a way of kind of dropping a little bit lower and realizing, so in this case, if you're feeling anxiety, there's actually a place from which you can just feel it, right? And be actually indifferent to it or anything else you could be feeling. I mean, just notice that there's even an unpleasant sensation. I mean, first you can notice that anxiety isn't even that unpleasant. I mean, it's so close to excitement in its actual physiology that really the difference between excitement and anxiety is more or less just the framing. It's just the story you're telling yourself. You know, if you felt these tingles and this, slightly adrenalized response right before, you're about to go on a roller coaster, that's part of why you're going on the roller coaster. You like that experience, right? But the fact that you feel that way when you're about to have an interview or you're about to, walk out on stage, that's intolerable, right? So just dropping back and realizing the power of the framing is again, this is a skill that is a fairly esoteric one, but now many people are learning it. The secret's out, and it has immense utility because then you can realize that the half-life of negative emotions is incredibly short. I mean, one, you can actually be psychologically free even in their presence, right? Your freedom and your well-being isn't even predicated on getting rid of the physiology, right? Like it can still be there, but if you're not continually thinking about all the reasons why you should be anxious, the physiology dissipates very, very quickly. And that's true for anger, it's true for anything that is classically negative.
Now I've got a really special bonus clip that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the question of the day. I want to know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week? The science says that when you just watch a video, you get motivated, you get inspired, you have a 35% chance of following through on your goals. 35%! That's not enough! That's not enough just to get motivated. Believe Nation, we're here, you're here. Today matters, you're an action taker. When you commit to a plan of action of when and how you're going to follow through, when you write it down, you have a 91% chance of following through. And when you commit publicly to somebody else, it jumps to 95% chance. From 30-something% to 95% chance of you following through. Believe Nation, we need to make this happen. So question of the day, your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action specific for the next week. Put it down in the comments below, and I'm going to show on screen sometime next week to celebrate you.
It goes back to the teachings of Epictetus, the Greek Stoic philosopher, who said roughly 2,000 years ago that people are disturbed not by things, not by events, not by what happens to us, but by our views of them. And that idea is so simple and basic that most people can't grasp what it means. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now, the second idea is that when you're depressed and anxious, again, it's not the events of your life that are upsetting you. It's the messages you're giving yourself, the way you're interpreting events. And when you're depressed, you're giving yourself messages like, I'm not as good as I should be. And there's a lot of people listening right now who are thinking that. And or if you're shy, you may be thinking, why am I so shy? I'm really screwed up. There must be something wrong with me. Depressed people often feel discouraged or hopeless, and then you're telling yourself, things will never change. This is my true self. I really am a loser. I'll be this way forever. And the really amazing thing, that's been kind of known, what I just said, more or less for 2,000 years, but what's really kind of new and awesome is that the thoughts that trigger depression and anxiety are not valid thoughts. Depression and anxiety is the world's oldest con, and you're fooling yourself, but you don't realize it. And then the final message from cognitive behavioral therapy is the very moment you change the way you think, in other words, the moment you suddenly see that those distorted thoughts aren't true, and you stop believing them in that instant. You can change.
Postpartum
Beautiful
depression,
woman.
obviously
Yeah.
hormonal.
Well, yeah.
How is
Yeah.
that just her thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's not only her thoughts, but her motivation to be depressed. But what she was telling herself is I'm a failure as a mother. She was having trouble with breastfeeding, and I shouldn't have mixed feelings about having a baby because she wasn't even sure she wanted to have a baby. And then she was telling herself, I have the wrong emotions. I should be better at breastfeeding. I'm failing as a mother. She was beating up on herself. And it's those thoughts, not some presumed hormonal imbalance, that's causing her depression. What is she telling herself? Well, she's telling herself, it's my fault that the baby isn't nursing. I'm a failure as a mother. And also, I shouldn't have mixed feelings about having a child. Mothers are supposed to just love their children. And those thoughts have all of the classic cognitive distortions. For example, should statements. I shouldn't have mixed feelings. Also, self-blame. It's my fault that the baby is having trouble nursing. That type of thing. And she had about 8 thoughts, and they all had multiple distortions, all or nothing thinking, looking at things in black or white categories. Emotional reasoning is huge. A lot of people who are listening right now feel depressed and hopeless, so that they feel like losers, so they say, I must be a loser. I feel like a loser. I must be hopeless. I feel hopeless. She's also involved in mind reading, thinking, other mothers don't have mixed feelings. Other mothers are, these ideal mothers. And so that's the first step, is to recognize that what you're telling yourself is not true. It's distorted. And the second thing is to realize that it's kind of mean-spirited what you're doing to yourself.
It turns out that one of the best stress relievers on the planet is something that most of us don't ever do. And that is seek out time with friends when we feel totally stressed out. When you're doing twice as much work as you normally do, or you're feeling twice as much stress as you normally feel, studies at Harvard show that what you need to see your friends twice as much. Now, Sean Anker is a really famous researcher and best-selling author at Harvard, and he studied this phenomenon. He looked at people that were stressed at schools and in call centers and in the military and in banks and in almost every single industry. What he discovered is that the most successful people, the people that were the best at selling, the people that were the most resilient, the people that had the best ability to deal with stress when times got tough, were the ones that saw their friends the most. It was the people with the tightest social connections that had the ability to weather the storms that life throw at us. I want you to write down 3 people that when you hang out with them, you feel energized, that when you have plans with them, you're excited about seeing them. When this video ends, reach out to them. That's right, pick up the phone, send them a text. I want you to invite them to do something. Go out to lunch, go for a walk in the woods, get a cup of coffee, go out to dinner. Even if you're not stressed out, I guarantee you at least one of the 3 people that you're going to reach out to needs you.
As I said, 70% of the time, people live in stress, and living in stress is living in survival. Now, all organisms in nature can tolerate short-term stress. A deer gets chased by a pack of coyotes. When it outruns the coyotes, it goes back to grazing and the event is over. And the definition of stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance, out of homeostasis. The stress response is what the body innately does to return itself back to order. So you're driving down the road, someone cuts you off, you jam on the brakes, you give them the finger, and then you settle back down and the event is over and boom, now everything's back to normal. But what if it's not a predator that's waiting for you outside the cave, but what if it's your coworker sitting right next to you, and all day long you're turning on those chemicals because they're pushing all your emotional buttons. When you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for disease, because no organism in nature can live in emergency mode for that extended period of time. It's a scientific fact that the hormones of stress downregulate genes and create disease, long-term effects. Human beings, because of the size of the neocortex, we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. We can think about our problems and turn on those chemicals. That means then our thoughts could make us sick. So if it's possible that our thoughts could make us sick, is it possible then our thoughts could make us well? And the answer is absolutely yes. So then, what are the emotions that are connected to survival? Let's name them. Anger, aggression, hostility, hatred, competition, fear, anxiety, worry, pain, suffering, guilt, shame, unworthiness, envy, jealousy. Those are all created by the hormones of stress. And psychology calls them normal human states of consciousness. I call those altered states of consciousness. So then we tend to remember those traumatic events more because in survival, you better be ready if it happens again. And when the survival gene is switched on, you could have 10 really great things that happen to you in your day. And you just have one bad thing that happens and you cannot take your attention off that unhappy thing because the survival gene is switched on. Many years ago, after the DNA helix was discovered by Watson and Crick, they said the blueprints of life, all diseases are created from genes. It turns out less than 5%, more like 1% of people on the planet are born with a genetic condition like type 1 diabetes or Tay-Sachs disease or sickle cell anemia. The other 95 to 99% are created by lifestyle and by choices. You can take two identical twins, exact same genome. One dies at 51, the other one dies at 85. Same gene, different environment. So all of a sudden they said, we lied. That was wrong. It's not genes that create disease. It's the environment that signals the gene that creates disease. Well, okay. But that's not the whole truth too, because you could have two people working side by side in the same factory. One gets cancer after being exposed to a carcinogenic for 25 years. Both working for 25 years, the other one has no cancer at all. So there must be some internal order that would cause one person to not get it while another one does. So is it possible then, if the environment signals the gene, and it does, and the end product of an experience in the environment is called an emotion, can you signal the gene ahead of the environment by embracing an elevated emotion? We've done the research on this. We measured 7,500 different gene expressions in a group of people that came to an advanced event for 4 days. And we had them doing a seated meditation, a walking meditation, a laying down meditation, a standing meditation. And at the end of 4 days, just 4 days, the common 8 genes that were upregulated, 2 genes to suppress cancer cells and tumor growth, 2 genes for neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons in response to novel experiences and learning, the gene that signals stem cells to go to damaged areas and repair them, the gene for oxidative stress was upregulated. We started seeing all these genes that are very, very healthy to cause the body to flourish. Imagine if people were doing that for 3 months. We also measured telomeres, the little shoestrings on the end of DNA that tell us our biological age. We asked people to do the work, meditation, 5 out of 7 days for 60 days. Measure their telomeres that determine their biological age. 60 days later, 74% of the people lengthened their telomeres. 40% significant change. 20% a very remarkable change. That means that they got a little bit of their life back. If it had lengthened by 10%, they got 10% of their life back.
I created a method. The components are breathing, mindset, and cold exposure. Gradual, non-forced cold exposure. And that's to optimize the mind-body connection.
Wim has figured out ways, namely through breath work and through exposure to cold, to take conscious control over aspects of his physiology that, for most people, they simply can't tune into and control.
The cold, my warm friend, it brings about a whole lot of more energy, and that together with breathing makes you so powerful. But then you lose your wife and it all rumbles down. 4 children I had with my wife, and I was to be with her forever. She was the love of my life. She died. She suicided. It's a black hole within yourself. It breaks your heart, and you don't know why, but the train of a daily life is going on, and you gotta catch up, otherwise you lose it. So I had to be there for my children, and yes, we created a new nest. My children made me survive in that time, but nature healed my wounds. The cold gave me a direct understanding of deeper breathing and how to heal a broken heart. Then I went and did all kinds of remarkable challenges. Apparently, they found it very remarkable and great and spectacular. So I came in contact with television. One after the other, they challenged me more. Hey, go swim 50 meters under the ice. Go swim 100 meters under the ice. Climb Mount Everest in shorts. That led up that the scientists became curious. Hey, what this man is doing is not possible physiologically.
The science of what Wim Hof method does is one of the primary interests of my lab now because it is so powerful and it's been shown to be powerful in the immune system. And we believe it will also hold some real potential for treatment of neurologic diseases.
And this breathing technique brings you right into the deepest part of our physiology. Anybody can do it. So you become the alchemist of your own chemistry.
When I was growing up, I had met my guru when I was about 21. And I was going to join his monastic order, which was in Hawaii. I was at that time living in Western Australia and studying in university. And I remember in my last year of engineering, I was feeling extremely stressed. I had a thesis which I'd been working on for 1.5 years that I needed to complete. In the next month, I had about 7 or 8 examinations that I had to pass in order to graduate as an engineer. I was the president of the youth group of our temple over there, the local temple over there, and we were organizing a lot of different events. And I was also dancing as part of a dance company that I was involved in, and they were also putting up a big show, so we were rehearsing almost every night. And I remember emailing my guru saying, Gurudev, I'm really stressed. I have all these things going on, and I'm stressed. He emailed me back, and I don't remember the exact words that he used, but he emailed me back and said, the reason you're stressed is because you don't keep your awareness on one thing at a time. And I'll be absolutely honest with you, ever since that day, I've never felt stressed anymore. And I know it's a very bold proclamation to make, but it's true. Because I clearly understood what he said to me at that point. Whenever I was dancing, I was thinking about my thesis. And when I was working on my thesis, I was thinking about the exams I had to do. When I was working on my exams, when I was studying for my exams, I was thinking about the youth group. And wherever I was thinking about something else. Anxiety comes because we allow awareness to drift away from the present moment and go into the future or into the past in an uncontrolled way. So the past and the future are not bad things as long as we indulge in them or we enter them with the aim to learn from them. But if we just allow awareness to travel into the past and into the future all the time, it creates anxiety. And we do that because we're afraid. Anxiety comes out of a sense of fear where we allow awareness to go into the future. We create a situation that hasn't happened. We bring it back into the present and start living it as it has already happened. You keep repeating the process over and over and over again, you build anxiety. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get sick. You think in the future, what if I get sick? Then what happens? Oh my God, I'm going to get sick. And then you bring back the present and you start living that. 5 minutes later, you let your awareness go into the future and you think to yourself, I'm not going to get better, I'm going to get sick. And then you bring awareness back into the present again and you start worrying about it. You keep repeating this process over and over again and you build anxiety. So The way to get overcome stress and anxiety is to really control where your awareness goes. Every time your awareness goes into the future or into the past in an uncontrolled way, bring it back to the present again. And just do this exercise. Be mindful of this throughout the entire day. Don't let your awareness go into the past or into the future in an uncontrolled way.
Get consumed by the positive energy. Focus not on your bad habits. Get consumed not by the negative energy of your bad habits. Sometimes we just get so consumed by it that all that's playing on our mind is that. No, that's meant to be dealt with. Focus on the good things that are happening in your life. And to focus on the good things and be grateful doesn't happen automatically. It's not our default setting. Our default setting is to go towards the negative. Our default setting is to focus on the negative. We have to customize our lives. By being consciously aware, we have to become more mindful and conscious of the wonderful gifts, the wonderful opportunities, the wonderful blessings that we've been showered with. And with that positive energy, with that positive emotion of gratitude, feel tremendously empowered to deal with our bad habits, to deal with our challenges. And therefore, do not be hateful about what you're going through in life. Be grateful for all those wonderful gifts that you've been given in your life.
If you want to learn how to beat anxiety with Mel Robbins, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I want you to actually make a more concerted effort to re-engage. Every one of us has an internal fuel tank that is either empty